Ken clutched his head tight. "Stop. Please, stop." He begged and pleaded, but the screeching in his head still persisted. His head throbbed with searing pain as that unholy wail echoed over and over again in his mind. He didn't know how much more of this he could take. The memory replaying in his mind so vividly. Those claws, those fangs. He was looking up at the creature as it held him down, an iron grip around his neck. Two empty voids for eyes staring down at him with pure hunger. A dark liquid poured over him, practically gallons of it. He remembered that foul taste, like rotten flesh. The memory's too much. "Stop!" he screamed again. "Stop!" Ken awoke with a jolt as a loud bang sounded. He turned his head, listening for it to sound once more. Then it went off again. He quickly realized that the sound was coming from his front door. "Who's there?" he called out into the dark. "I'm sorry. I didn't know anyone was staying here," a man responded, breathing heavily. Ken guessed that the man had been running. He ran his hand through his orange hair. This was the third person today. He hoped to God this didn't turn out like the last two. So much blood. Ken took in a deep breath to calm his nerves. He really did not want to repeat the same thing a third time. "Okay, what's your name? Are you hurt?" Ken asked. "What?" the man stammered. "Am I hurt? I'm smothered in blood and cuts. Yes, I'm fucking hurt. Are you blind?" Ken pointed his hand to the man, then pointed it back at his face. "Look at me for a moment." "Yes," he said calmly. "I am blind." Ken pictured the man for a moment. The guy was probably terrified, his eyes wide, darting around the cabin frantically in search of something useful. Something he wouldn't find. The only thing Ken left out for display was a small table, wood stove, cooler, and the bed he was currently sitting on in the corner of the cabin. As Ken thought about this, he paused. Wait, the man's injured, which means... crud. He opened his mouth to say something, but the man beat him to it. "Wait, you're blind?" the man asked. "That explains the black band around your head." Guess you couldn't afford to get the man was cut off suddenly by a loud bang. Ken wondered if there was something right outside the door, slamming against it. Whatever it was out there must have had some brains to wait a while before attacking again. Ken pushed himself off from his bed. Stepping forward, he felt a light heat overcome his body. He guessed that he must be in front of one of the shutters covering the windows. Ken heard creaking of wood from where he last heard the man, and the bang. He wondered if the guy was pushing up against the door. The man groaned in pain as he did this. "Tell me," Ken began, "how bad are your injuries?" The man grunted before responding. I got a couple of gashes in my right arm. These things are leaking blood. I can't use it anymore." Ken tilted his head to the side. He knew exactly what he was going to ask next. "You didn't get anything black on you, did you?" Ken heard the sound of shuffling coming from ahead. He assumed the man was moving about nervously. "Why? Is that something bad?" the man asked. "Yes, that's extremely bad," Ken exclaimed. More shuffling sounded ahead of him, before the man responded, "Well, I don't think I did, no." If Ken could have done it, he would have narrowed his eyes right now. He didn't believe that for a second. Ken knew that if this was anything like the last two who were here, this guy more than likely had that disease coursing through his veins and was not aware of it. As this thought crossed through Ken's mind, the heat around his body suddenly vanished. He hugged himself, trying to warm himself up a bit, as cold overtook him. He spun his head to face the direction where he knew the shutter to be. "Did you move to the shutter?" Ken asked. He assumed the guy must be getting consumed by paranoia, possibly trying to peek out to see where the thing outside was. Ken realized that something must be standing right outside the window, peeking in at them. As soon as the man responded, "No, I'm still at the door," Ken listened very closely. He then stiffened as the sound of something scratching against glass rang in his ear. "Damn," Ken thought to himself. He decided to inch closer to the shutter. He reached his hand down and gripped the handle of the revolver that he had in his pocket. If he was going to do what he had to do, it needed to be at point blank. He felt nervous as the band around his eyes began to dampen. "Shoot," he thought. "Looks like I'm on a bit more of a time crunch." "What are you doing?" the man hissed. Ken turned his head in his direction and put his fingers up to his lips, gesturing for the man to be quiet. He didn't want to agitate whatever was outside before he took his shot. As he drew closer, he heard a low growl. As Ken continued his crawl, the thing outside sounded as if it was breathing much more rapidly. Ken reached his hand out for the shutter. Slowly but surely, he managed to find it. The moment his finger pressed against the wood, everything fell silent. Ken felt his nervousness rise even more as he stared into the pure black unknown. The only sound that emanated was a low ringing in his ear. What was going on? Was it still there? Or was it waiting silently for him to make a wrong move? Ken didn't know, but what he did know was that his face was most likely just inches away from the glass. If that thing was crouched right outside, that meant that it would be staring back at him mere centimeters away. Ken stiffened as the sounds of bone popping and cracking broke through the silence. Ken's imagination began to take control. Ken pictured a hideous creature opening its mouth in a wide, unnatural smile as its bones snapped into place. Or maybe its jaw unhinging to an unnatural length as it prepared to lunge at him. Ken shivered at the thought as he slowly began to inch his revolver from its resting place. But before he could raise his hand to take the shot, the man from earlier let out low, harsh, muffled coughing. "You gotta be kidding me," Ken hissed under his breath as the man's coughing continued. The coughing intensified more and more until Ken suddenly heard something wet and slimy splatter against the floor where the coughing was coming from. The creature outside suddenly slammed against the wall, letting out a loud screech. It hit once, then twice. Then finally, On the third slam, it shattered glass, knocking Ken aside. As Ken tried to pick himself back up, he heard the man call out, oh God, it's trying to get inside." As soon as Ken sat up, he raised the revolver that he clutched tight and fired, causing the creature to let another unholy wail before the sound of snow crunching could be heard, getting further and further away. Ken breathed heavily. "It'll be back soon. I know what those are, and they don't give up easily." "What are we gonna do?" the man asked. Ken thought on it for a moment. Then he shrugged his shoulders. "I honestly don't know. When it comes back, we could be goners. A blind man and one who's injured don't exactly make the best tag team for this particular situation." "But you managed to shoot it," the man responded. "That particular situation had some stuff to help me out. The glass shattering from the window, me knowing where the window is, and you shouting that it's trying to get in told me everything that I needed to know to take the shot." Ken paused for a moment. "And I don't think we're gonna get another chance like that again." Ken could hear the man try to respond before he suddenly ended up in another fit of coughing. The coughing intensified once again as he began to hack something else up. Ken knew this guy was not going to last much longer if it was what he thought he was. Ken picked himself up and ambled over to where he last shot the creature, only stopping as soon as he felt the cold breeze from the now shattered window hit him right in the face. He listened closely. Over time, Ken was able to make out a quiet sound in the distance. He inched forward so that way he could hear a bit better. He frowned as the sound became clearer. It was the sound from earlier, snow crunching beneath something. It came from the left, then slowly it crept in front of him, then to the right, and vanished. "It's circling the cabin," Ken said. He didn't know if he was shaking from the cold or fear as he stared off into nothing. The sound returned again, coming from the left, then ahead, then silence. Ken guessed that the thing was most likely hiding behind one of the trees in the distance, just staring at him. He waited for a while longer, but nothing came. He furrowed his brow as he wondered, what was it doing this time? Sweat slid down Ken's face as he waited. Still, nothing happened. Was it still there? Or had it found a way to silently creep forward through the snow? That last thought terrified him. The man entered another violent fit of coughing. Ken shook his head. "All right," he said. "He isn't going to make it. And if I keep this up, we're both going to die." He needed to confirm it, though, first. "Tell me," Ken said. "What is it exactly that you're coughing up?" "I don't know," the man responded. Ken took note of how different his voice was. "That confirms it," he thought to himself. Ken raised his hand. Gripping the now drenched band, he lifted it from his head. A dark liquid poured freely down his cheeks as he did. He spun around and stared down at the man who was currently on his hands and knees, still coughing. Displayed before the man was a black, chunky fluid splattered all over the floor. more of it dripped from his mouth as he continued to cough. Huh, Ken said. He turned his head to the side and made out a large shape hidden amongst the trees in the distance. Ken saw a tall, thin figure hunched over. As his eyes traveled up the bony frame, he made out the head of a cat atop the body. Two empty voids stared at him as its jaw lowered to an abnormal length, that sound of bone popping and cracking returning once more. Not this time, old friend, Ken said calmly. But I'll share it with you this time, since you terrified me that much. Ken switched his gaze to the crumpled form of the man on the ground. Looks like he got to you, he said. You're infected now, Ken said as the man let out a low groan. That groan slowly turned to a growl as the man lifted his head. Ken lowered the revolver leveled at the man's skull. And unlike me, he continued, staring into those blackened eyes that matched his own, you're not immune to some of the symptoms. Ken knew what he had to do. He sighed as the sound of the hammer in the revolver cocked back. No matter what, he would not let this thing get out.